The whole track went quiet when Mrs. Bernice Walker unfolded that yellow split sheet. It was not a fancy thing, just 4 lines written in careful blue ink, creased down the middle from being kept inside the pocket of her old windbreaker. But the minute she laid it flat on the official's table, Coach Darren Pike stopped smiling. Behind him, the regional meet was already falling apart. A girl from East Mill had cramped on the second turn. A relay team from South Granger had missed their exchange. The sky above the stadium had turned the color of wet concrete, and the wind was pushing hard down the backstretch like it had a personal grudge against every runner in Lane 1. And there stood Bernice Walker, 68 years old, black, small enough that folks talked over her without even meaning to. Gray curls tucked under a sun-faded cap, a church fan in one hand, that yellow paper in the other. 4 minutes earlier, Coach Pike had laughed in front of everyone and told her she could sit back down. "Benches are for old folks." That was his line. He said it the first time like a joke. He said it loud enough for the parents to hear, loud enough for the girls in warm-ups to hear, loud enough for Bernice to hear every last syllable and still keep her face peaceful. Now nobody was laughing, because the numbers on that paper were matching the race on the track, split for split, stride for stride, almost breath for breath. If you have ever been looked past, talked over, or treated like your years made you useless, stay with this story. And if you are listening from your kitchen, your work truck, your bedroom, or your front porch, subscribe and put your city in the comments. Somebody from your town may need to hear what happened to Mrs. Walker before this night is over. Because before that yellow sheet shook a whole stadium, before the East Mill girls cried into their towels, before Coach Pike had to stand in front of the same crowd he had played to, Bernice Walker was just the lady on the bench. Not assistant coach, not consultant, not former champion, just Miss B, the woman who kept peppermints in a sandwich bag and reminded athletes to drink water before they thought they needed it. The afternoon had started with heat rising off the track and clear waves. Regional Day always brought out people who did not come to regular meets. Men with folded arms and sunglasses, mothers with umbrellas, little cousins running under bleachers, school administrators wearing polo shirts like uniforms. Everybody wanted to stand near victory, even if they had never shown up for practice. Bernice arrived early. She always did. She came through the side gate with a canvas tote on her shoulder and her shoes already tied tight. Not running shoes anymore. Those days had passed into the soft ache of memory. These were plain white walking shoes from the discount rack, the kind with extra cushion and no style. She had polished them clean anyway. Her windbreaker was navy, though the sleeves had faded lighter than the chest. On the left side, above her heart, you could still make out the old stitched letters from a track club that no longer existed. Pike saw her by the relay table. He was 39, maybe 40, with a whistle around his neck and a clipboard he held like a badge. He had taken over the girls' track club 2 seasons ago, after the old coach retired. He liked clean uniforms, bright social media posts, and athletes who made him look good quickly. He did not like questions. He especially did not like questions from Bernice. "Morning, Coach," she said. He did not look up. "Morning, Miss B." "I was watching Tasha's drive phase Tuesday. She's opening too soon on that second curve." Pike tapped his pen against the clipboard. "We've got it handled." Bernice nodded once. "All right." That was her way. She never pushed a door that had been shut in her face. She simply remembered where the hinges were. Across the infield, Tasha Reed sat on the bench with her spikes beside her feet. 17 years old, long legs, nervous hands. A runner with more engine than polish. Bernice had seen that kind before. The kind everybody praised for speed, but nobody taught how to carry pressure. Tasha's mother had dropped her off before sunrise because she worked doubles at the hospital cafeteria. So Bernice had brought an extra banana, 2 safety pins, and a small bottle of liniment in case the girl's hamstring tightened again. She was handing Tasha the banana when Pike walked over. "Miss B," he said, smiling for the parents nearby. "Today I need you to let the coaches coach." Bernice looked up. "I'm just making sure she eats. She can eat after warm-ups. She runs better with something on her stomach." Pike's smile sharpened. "This is regionals, not Sunday school picnic." A few parents chuckled. Tasha looked down. Bernice folded the top of the banana peel back into place and set it gently on the bench. She had been humiliated by experts before. People with new shoes, new titles, and old blindness. The trick was not to answer every insult. Some insults were seeds. You let them fall. You let time water them. I hear you, Bernice said, but Pike was not finished. He pointed to the far end of the bench, where coolers and extra towels sat in a crooked line. Have a seat down there, he said. Benches are for old folks. This time, more people heard it. One father made a sound through his nose. One assistant coach turned away too fast. A girl from the 400 squad froze with her hand inside a bag of pretzels. Bernice did not blink. Her face stayed calm, but something deep in the air changed. The moment settled over the track, like water finding the lowest place. She picked up her tote, she walked to the end of the bench, and she sat down exactly where he pointed. Not because he had won, because she had learned long ago that dignity did not need a microphone. From that seat, she could see everything. The handoffs, the wind, the way Tasha shook her right leg when she was scared, the way Pike kept checking the favorites in lane 5, but ignored the danger building in lane 3. The way the clouds gathered over the stadium lights, though, it was only 4 in the afternoon. Inside her tote, under the peppermints and the church bulletin, Bernice's yellow split sheet waited. 4 laps, 4 numbers, 1 truth nobody on that bench was ready to hear. Bernice Walker had not always been the woman at the end of somebody else's bench. Back in 1974, before her knees learned the weather and before her hands got those little knots at the knuckles, she could run a quarter mile so smooth the crowd would forget to cheer until she was already through the tape. Folks used to say she did not look fast. That was before they saw her move. She had grown up on the east side of Millhaven, in a 2-bedroom house where the screen door never closed right, and the kitchen table had 1 short leg balanced on a folded church program. Her mother, Louise, cleaned offices at night and sang alto in the choir on Sunday morning like she had not been awake since Saturday. Louise Walker believed in 2 things with equal seriousness: the Lord and doing work clean enough that nobody could question it. Baby, she used to tell Bernice, when the world refuses to see you, don't spend your strength begging. Put the truth where it can't be stepped over. Bernice did not understand that as a girl. She understood it later. She understood it when college scouts watched other runners and called her steady instead of special. She understood it when she got her 1 scholarship offer from a small state school 3 counties away. She understood it when an ankle injury ended her last season before she could run the time she knew was in her body. She understood it most of all when her husband James got sick, and every dream had to be folded small enough to fit inside a hospital schedule. James had loved track more than most men loved football. He could sit with a stopwatch and see a race like sheet music. After their son moved out and their bills got tight, he and Bernice started timing neighborhood kids at the cracked municipal track behind Grace Temple Church. They had no grant, no uniforms, no fancy tent, just a folding chair, a cooler full of donated water, and James's old stopwatch with a scratched silver back. The button stuck if you pressed it too hard, so Bernice learned to tap it light. 1 clean touch at the line. 1 clean touch at every 200. Then she wrote the numbers on whatever she had: receipts, offering envelopes, the back of funeral programs. She saw patterns before other people did. Not because she was magic, because she paid attention. A runner who faded at 300 did not need more yelling. She needed a safer first 100. A girl who lost form in the curve did not need shame. She needed rhythm. A relay that dropped batons under pressure did not need punishment. They needed to practice fear until it stopped being new. After James passed, Bernice kept the stopwatch. She kept his chair too, though 1 leg had been wrapped in silver duct tape for almost 10 years. Her own apartment was small now. 2nd floor, no elevator, a hallway that smelled like boiled cabbage on Mondays and floor cleaner on Fridays. In the living room, the couch had a fitted sheet tucked over 1 torn arm. Her television sat on a stand James had built from scrap wood. Her cereal stayed in a coffee mug because bowls took up space in the sink. Still, every Saturday morning she came to the track. She brought peppermints because young athletes always said they were not nervous until their mouths went dry. She brought a needle and black thread because somebody always tore something. She brought a church fan because sometimes an anxious girl did not need a speech. She just needed somebody sitting beside her, moving air. And she brought that stopwatch. Nobody paid much attention to it. Why would they? It looked like an old thing from an old life. The numbers on the front had faded around the edges. The cord was tied in a knot where it had frayed. Bernice carried it in the side pocket of her tote with her reading glasses and a folded napkin. But on quiet mornings, before the coaches arrived, Tasha Reed noticed. She noticed how Miss B clicked it at the exact moment her foot struck the curve. She noticed how Miss B could tell her she had gone out too fast before the time even showed. She noticed how Miss B would write 4 numbers on a yellow legal pad and stare at them like they were speaking. One Thursday, after practice, Tasha asked, "Miss B, how do you know all that?" Bernice smiled without showing her teeth. "Know what?" "My race. You know where I'm going to mess up before I do." Bernice tucked the stopwatch into her palm. "Baby, the lap tells on you. It always does." Tasha. But Bernice was not joking. The lap told everything. Where pride started, where fear entered, where training held, where the body asked the mind whether it truly meant what it said. That season, Bernice had watched Tasha run the 1600 relay anchor leg 4 times. Each time, the girl went out like she was trying to outrun everybody's doubts in the first 100 meters. Each time, she paid for it on the 3rd curve. Not enough for casual eyes to see. Just a lift in the chin, a reach in the stride, a little panic in the arms. So Bernice wrote it down. She made a simple 4-lap split sheet. Not for Pike, not for the parents. For Tasha. Lap 1, patient. Lap 2, press. Lap 3, breathe. Lap 4, bring it home. Nothing about Bernice ever gave it away. That was the gift. Her plainness made people careless. Her quiet made them underestimate how much she was gathering. Her age made them assume she was behind the world, when the truth was she had been studying movement longer than some of them had been alive. On regional morning, before Pike told her where to sit, Bernice had folded the yellow sheet and placed it in her tote. She did not expect to use it. She hoped she would not have to. But hope, like faith, did not mean ignoring what your eyes could see. And Bernice Walker's eyes had seen the storm coming before anybody else looked up. Coach Darren Pike had built his whole life around not being embarrassed. That was what most people missed about him. They saw the sharp shirts, the polished shoes, the way he stood with his chin lifted during warm-ups. They saw how he corrected runners where parents could hear him, how he liked to say, "my program," even though half the girls had been coming to that track before he arrived. But under all that shine was a man afraid somebody would find out he was not as certain as he sounded. He had run in high school. He had been good, not great. Fast enough to be praised in a small town, not fast enough to be remembered outside it. Then he got into coaching, and coaching gave him something running never had: control. He could decide who started, who sat, who got praised, who got blamed. And lately, control had been slipping. The club's numbers were down. Parents were whispering about transfers. The regional director had sent 2 emails asking why their relay times had stalled. A sponsor from a local sports clinic was coming that afternoon, and Pike needed one clean victory to prove his program was still worth funding. That was why Tasha mattered. She was the fastest anchor leg he had. She was also the one he trusted least. Not because she lacked talent, because she did not make him feel powerful. Tasha listened to Bernice. When Pike gave instructions, Tasha nodded. When Bernice spoke softly, Tasha changed. Pike had noticed. He noticed everything that threatened his authority. By the time the first events began, the wind had gotten meaner. It rolled across the stadium in uneven pushes, slapping lane flags sideways and lifting paper cups off the bleachers. The smart teams adjusted. They held back on the first straight, protected energy, and saved their arms for the last curve. Pike did not adjust. He kept telling his runners, "Attack early, make them chase." Bernice heard it from her seat by the coolers. She looked across the track at lane 5, where Westbridge had the favorite. Smooth form, tall girl, powerful finish. But the danger was not Westbridge. The danger was East Mill and Lane 3. Their anchor was shorter, compact, the kind of runner who did not look pretty, but never wasted a step. Bernice watched her warm up and felt something tighten in her chest. Tasha could beat that girl. But not with pride. Not with fear, only with patience. During the Open 400, Tasha ran too hard in the first half and came second. Pike clapped anyway, too loud, then leaned down close enough that only she and Bernice could hear. "You're thinking too much," he said. "Run like you want it." Tasha swallowed. "Yes, coach." Bernice said nothing. She opened her tote and touched the edge of the yellow paper. "Not yet." In the 800, another girl from their club faded badly with 200 to go. Pike blamed her kick. Bernice knew it was the first lap. The girl had gone out 3 seconds too fast because Pike had been shouting at her down the straight. Again, Bernice said nothing. Some lessons were useless until the room had run out of excuses. By late afternoon, the regional team standings were close. 1 point here, 2 points there. The final 1,600 relay would decide everything. Parents pressed against the fence. The sponsor from the sports clinic stood near the officials' table in a white jacket, arms folded. The regional director had come down from the press box. Even the younger runners stopped playing and gathered near the turn. Pike paced in front of the relay team. "All right," he said. "We don't get cute. We don't overthink. We take the lead early and we keep it." Bernice looked at Tasha. Tasha was tying and retying the same lace. The girl's hands were shaking. Bernice rose slowly from the bench. Pike saw her before she took 3 steps. "Miss B," he said. She kept her voice low. "I need 30 seconds with Tasha." He smiled that public smile again. "No, ma'am, not now. She needs to hear the pace. She needs to hear her coach." Bernice held his eyes. "That third lap is where this race turns." Pike's jaw moved once. A few parents leaned closer. He turned so the crowd could see his patience. "Miss B, I respect your help with snacks and all that, but this is strategy." Bernice breathed in through her nose. Tasha stared at the track. Pike pointed back to the bench, the same place as before. Then he said it again. "Benches are for old folks." This time, it did not get a laugh. The words landed heavier now. Meaner. Less like a joke and more like a door being locked. Bernice looked at him for one long second. Then she looked at Tasha. "Baby," she said softly, "when the wind hits your face on lap 3, don't fight it. Count 3 breaths. Shorten your arms. Let the other girl spend herself." Pike stepped between them. "That's enough." Bernice nodded. She went back to the bench. But Tasha had heard, and Pike had heard Tasha hear. The first 3 relay legs were chaos. Their opening runner went out strong but came back tight. The second lost ground on the exchange. The third fought hard, swinging wide on the curve and handing off to Tasha nearly 8 meters behind East Mill. Pike shouted, "Go now! Go now!" The crowd roared. Tasha exploded down the straight. Too fast. Bernice felt it before the stopwatch confirmed it. She clicked James's old watch at the line. The first split blinked up. Too hot. She wrote it on the yellow sheet beside the numbers she had predicted. Almost exactly. On the second turn, Tasha gained 3 meters. Pike jumped with both fists clenched. "Yes, that's it! Take it!" But Bernice's heart sank. East Mill's anchor was not panicking. She was waiting. By the time Tasha crossed into the second lap, her shoulders had begun to rise. Just a little. Just enough. Bernice clicked the watch again. The number matched. The storm she had seen was no longer coming. It was here. Tasha hit the backstretch like she was running into a wall made of wind. The whole stadium could see her fighting now. Her chin lifted, her elbows flared, her stride stretched too far in front of her body, searching for ground that was not there. East Mill's anchor stayed tucked behind her right shoulder, patient as a shadow. Pike was still yelling, "Push! Push now!" Bernice stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady with James's old stopwatch in one hand and the yellow paper in the other. The third lap was beginning. That was the lap that told the truth. Tasha's face tightened as the wind struck her. For a moment, Bernice saw the girl almost break rhythm. Then Tasha did something so small, most people missed it. She shortened her arms. 1 beat. 2 beats. 3 breaths. Bernice's eyes filled, but her hand stayed sure. She clicked the watch at the line. The split came up, exactly where the yellow sheet said it needed to be. Not Pike's plan. Not panic. Not pride. Patience. East Mill's anchor made her move on the curve. The crowd rose with the sound of it. She came wide, trying to pass before the final straight, trying to make Tasha answer too soon. Pike screamed, "Don't let her by!" Tasha did not answer. She held. She let the girl spend herself. And when they came off the turn, when the wind finally shifted from enemy to something almost like a hand at her back, Tasha drove. Her arms came clean, her knees lifted, her shoulders dropped. She ran like a girl who had stopped trying to prove she belonged and started remembering that she did. 10 meters from the finish, East Mill's anchor faded. 5 meters from the finish, Tasha passed her. At the line, the stadium broke open. People shouted so loud the sound seemed to shake water loose from the clouds. Tasha bent over with her hands on her knees. Her teammates rushed her. Pike leapt once, then turned toward the officials' table with his arms raised, already wearing victory like a coat he had bought before the race began. But the regional director was not looking at Pike. He was looking at Bernice, because the official timer had a question. There had been a protest from East Mill, not about contact, not about lanes, about pacing assistance. Their coach claimed Pike had been shouting illegal split instructions through the race. Pike's face changed. "That's ridiculous," he said. "I was motivating my athlete." The East Mill coach pointed across the track. He was calling strategy every lap. The official looked at the relay table. "Does your staff have written pace documentation?" Pike opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because he had no splits. He had no lap plan. He had only noise. That was when Bernice stepped forward and laid the yellow sheet on the table. The whole place seemed to narrow around that paper. 4 lines, 4 target splits, 4 actual marks written beside them in blue ink. The first too hot, the second controlled, the third corrected, the fourth victorious. The official picked it up. "Who prepared this?" Bernice lifted James's old stopwatch. "I did." Pike gave a short laugh, but it cracked in the middle. "Come on, she sits on the bench." Bernice did not look at him. The regional director studied the sheet. "These are pre-race targets?" "Yes, sir," Bernice said. "And these marks?" "Taken during the race." "With that watch?" "With this watch." The director looked at the stopwatch, then at Bernice, then at Tasha, who had gone completely still near the finish line. The silence filled the stadium like water rising in a room. The official compared the sheet to the automatic timing report. 1 number, then another, then another. His eyebrows lifted. "These are within tenths," he said. The sponsor in the white jacket unfolded his arms. "Who exactly is Mrs. Walker?" Pike's mouth tightened. "She volunteers." Bernice finally turned to him, not angry, not proud, just clear. "I volunteer because nobody pays me," she said. "That is not the same as nobody needing what I know." The words traveled across the table, across the track, across every parent who had laughed too quickly, and every athlete who had lowered her eyes. The regional director held up the sheet. "This establishes a pre-existing pacing plan. The protest is denied." The East Mill coach exhaled hard, but nodded. The official posted the result. Millhaven Track Club had won regionals. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Tasha ran. Not to Pike, to Bernice. She crossed the infield and threw her arms around the old woman carefully, like she was hugging something precious that had already survived too much. Bernice closed her eyes and held her. Pike stood beside the officials' table with his clipboard hanging at his side. The same parents who had laughed now looked anywhere but at him. The regional director turned toward Pike, voice low enough to be formal and loud enough to be heard. Coach, from now on, when Mrs. Walker has something to say about pacing, I suggest you listen. Then he glanced at the bench, and Pike heard his own line come back to him without Bernice even needing to repeat it. Benches were for old folks. But today, the old woman on the bench had seen the race better than the man standing in charge. After the medal ceremony, Bernice Walker tried to slip away. That was her habit. She had never loved the part where people clapped for the person they had ignored 10 minutes earlier. Applause could be sweet, but it could also be a way for folks to forgive themselves without ever saying they were sorry. So while the girls posed with the regional plaque and parents lifted phones into the damp evening air, Bernice packed her tote. Peppermints, church fan, needle and thread, yellow split sheet, James's stopwatch. She wrapped the stopwatch cord around her fingers the way she always did, slow and careful, as if James might feel the tug of it somewhere beyond the clouds. Tasha found her before she reached the gate. Miss B! Bernice turned. The girl was still breathing hard, still shining with sweat, still holding that anchor baton like it had become part of her hand. You saved my race, Tasha said. Bernice shook her head. No, baby. I helped you hear it. Tasha frowned a little, young enough to want the words to be bigger. Bernice touched the yellow paper against the girl's arm. You ran it, she said. Every step, every correction, every breath. Don't ever let anybody make you think wisdom takes the place of your work. It only helps your work stand up straight. Tasha looked down at the sheet. I thought he knew everything, she whispered. Bernice looked across the field. Coach Pike stood near the equipment shed, speaking with the regional director and the sponsor in the white jacket. His shoulders were lower now. His voice did not carry. He looked less like a man in charge and more like a man finally meeting the cost of being careless with people. Bernice could have enjoyed that. A smaller spirit might have, but Louise Walker had raised her differently. James had loved her differently. And age, when it has done its holy work, does not just teach a person how to survive insult. It teaches them which victories are too sacred to cheapen with gloating. He knows some things, Bernice said. He just forgot he didn't know all things. Tasha nodded slowly. Behind them, a few parents approached. The same father who had laughed earlier stopped, with his cap in his hands. He could not seem to find a place to put his eyes. Mrs. Walker, he said, I owe you an apology. Bernice studied him for one quiet second. Then she said, Give it to the girls. He blinked. They hear everything, Bernice said. Laughing, doubting, dismissing. They carry it into lanes with them. Next time, let them hear better. The man nodded, face warm with shame. I will, he said. One by one, the others came softer. Not all of them apologized. Some just thanked her too brightly. Some pretended they had always known she was special. Bernice let all of it pass over her like rain on a roof. She had lived long enough to understand that recognition often arrived wearing the wrong clothes. The sponsor from the sports clinic came last. He was a tall man with silver glasses and a careful voice. Mrs. Walker, he said, our clinic funds a youth performance program. We need someone who understands pacing, recovery, and the mental side of young athletes. I'd like to discuss a paid position. The word paid hung in the air. Tasha's mouth fell open. Bernice did not answer right away. She looked at the track. At lane 1, where the wind had bullied so many runners. At the finish line, where truth had arrived on tired legs. At the bench, where Pike had sent her because he thought sitting meant surrender. Then she looked down at James's stopwatch in her palm. For years, people had treated her knowledge like church leftovers. Useful if free, welcome if quiet. Appreciated only after the room had run out of younger voices. But worth does not begin when somebody writes a check. Worth does not begin when a crowd finally turns its head. Worth is there in the unseen mornings, in the careful notes, in the hands that keep showing up after nobody claps. Bernice folded the yellow sheet once, then again. "I'll talk with you," she said. "But only if the girls who need help most can come too." The sponsor smiled. "That can be arranged." Coach Pike approached while they were speaking. For a moment, nobody moved. He held his clipboard against his chest now instead of out in front of him. "Mrs. Walker," he said. Bernice waited. His voice lowered. "I was wrong." The stadium noise seemed to soften around those 4 words. Not disappear, just soften. Bernice looked at him, and in her eyes there was no victory dance, no revenge, no hunger to make him smaller. She had been made small by too many people to enjoy doing it back. "Yes," she said gently. "You were." Pike swallowed. "I'd like you to help with pacing next season." Bernice glanced at Tasha, then at the relay girls gathered behind her, still pretending not to listen. "I'll help the girls," Bernice said, "and I'll help you too, if you're willing to learn without needing to be the loudest voice." Pike nodded once. It was not a perfect ending. Life rarely gives those, but it was a clean beginning. A week later, Bernice Walker walked back onto that track with a new whistle, the same old cap, and James's stopwatch hanging from her neck. The girls were waiting by the starting line. Tasha stood in front, holding a fresh yellow pad. Bernice smiled. 4 laps, she said. 4 chances to tell the truth. And this time, nobody told her to sit down, because the world may overlook a quiet woman on a bench. But the track remembers who can read the race. Have you ever been underestimated? Tell me below. Subscribe if you believe the people the world overlooks often carry the wisdom that saves the room. And next time, you'll hear about the courthouse clerk they told to stay silent, until one blue stamp reopened 28 forgotten cases.